welcome back to the VIPCO Strong Uncut podcast. It's episode 3 now, with me, Jason Impey, indie filmmaker, joined as ever with
James Simpson, who's recovering from a heavy cold, so if I sound a bit nasally, apologies, but that's what you're going to get.
What are we talking about this week?
We're going to have another episode dedicated to a big hitter film, the Fab Four, as it were, VIPCO. This episode being dedicated to the driller killer.
See Jimmy Lane as Reno Miller, a man driven to the very edge. And then beyond. The driller killer is coming.
These sort of films, especially Driller Killer, there's so much to talk about, not just the film, but the context surrounding it. We're going to talk about Driller Killer, and this one is the one that landed VIPCO in the hot water, as it were, with the politicians, the moral crusaders and Mary Whitehouse of the era. I think, Jason, didn't you recently get this on original VIPCO pre-cert VHS for quite a bit of money?
Yeah, it set me back like 95 quid to get the original pre-cert VIPCO VHS. I do love this film as well, and it is really significant because obviously the case is infamous with the drill going into the tramp's head. In fact, my documentary covers that it is one of the most over-the-top advertising campaigns there was for a film release, home video release, and ever since then has been a bit more tight, strict rules in place because of that. Mike did say as well he did that because he felt the film was a bit naff. He wanted just to cash in on the whole gore horror aspect, and when he got the film he realised it wasn't really just straight stalk and slash film, so did that as an advertising campaign to hit sales, which was obviously become infamous because it was used as a big advert in the press, and definitely got a lot of sales. And yeah, the advertising campaign that Mike and VIPCO did alone is what made that film quite infamous over in the UK shores anyway. I really like the film personally, but it is very different. It's like an art house film really, not so much a horror.
Yeah, I personally, I remember for years obviously wanting to see this. I was much too young to see it at first when I first was aware of the infamous poster. And I must admit, when I first saw the film, I think I was 16. I was quite disappointed because I expected something so much different because of VIPCO's poster. And you're right, it is quite a bit of an art house film with a bit of a driller killer involved, but for the most part, it is not what you think it is based on the front cover alone and the tagline.
Well, I was aware of the film, obviously because of the notorious of it, but I taped it. I recorded it off the TV when it was shown on Film 4 when I was in my early teens, and watched it that way with the ad breaks and all. And yeah, it stood out to me. It left its impact on me because I was at an influential age where I was experimenting with video production myself, and there was something that really drew me in because it was like a social commentary on life, to be honest with you. I found it quite a deep film, and I still do, really. I still think it's quite a relevant film, actually.
The fact that on the cover, it is, you've said there, the homeless guy, the tramp, is being killed. That could be some sort of social commentary on how Americans treat the homeless. But I don't think Michael Lee probably thought that too deep into it.
No, the VIPCO campaign was pure and simple, cashing on gore, and his outlook was the great British public love a gore horror film, and let's give them that and just get the sales in. And yeah, there wasn't that the main drive behind the advertising for the VIPCO point of view was just sales using gore as a selling technique and cashing on the horror element of it. As I say, it's hard to label it. It is a horror film really, but it's more of a horror film about life in general, and getting pushed too far, and mental health issues, and just society draining you really. I think I said it's out of the catalogue of stuff that's been put out, it stands out as quite a deep, meaningful film rather than some of the just senseless gore films.
Again, as Jason said, it was just, the great British public want gore apparently, and this is what they got. And I think the front cover is definitely the most graphic, extreme thing about the film. And as Jason said, if you watch the film with an open mind, maybe there is something a bit more profound in there. And the lead character, the person that you said there, there's people struggling mentally, unraveling. That lead role was played by the director himself.
Yeah, he became quite infamous for that as well, really. VIPCO have got a lot of this on their catalogue. That was the film that kind of made Abel Ferreira's career, really. It was one of his standout films, his first kind of hit film that got him well on his way to produce some great stuff that he went on to do, become a cult icon in his own right. And obviously, it's another film where, the cult classic collection really is what it is, really. It was shamefully, though, it was only a pre-cert VHS release from VIPCO. They never actually returned to release that on DVD on the Screen Time collection.
If the rumours are correct, and I hope they are, because I've mentioned this in my VIPCO book, but the film's public domain by all accounts. Have you heard differently, or is that right, Jason?
Yeah, there is some kind of legal issue with it, such as Night of the Living Dead, where there's part of the film they've tried to copyright because there was a bit of a loophole that they missed. Like Night of the Living Dead didn't get copyrighted. I think he's copyrighted the film, but not the script. That's the issue. So the script is public domain. So technically, anyone can actually make that film from the script. I know they've tried to correct it, but there was going to be a remake. Bryn Hammond from Gorzo magazine was going to play the tramp in it that gets the drill now. And there was going to be an EastEnders star in it, and that was in talks for ages. And I was kind of involved up in that because I was working with Gorzo magazine doing their video content, but nothing ever came about. I still hear talks of it, but no remakes ever resurfaced.
With Ferrara, you said that it made his career because if you think about it, Driller Killer was made 79, and then by the end of the 80s, he had made, or he was about to release, King of New York with Christopher Walken, and then a couple of years after that, Bad Lieutenant. Quite a departure and a far cry from someone who made a scuzzy, low-budget art house film called Driller Killer.
His films are still very gritty and raw, and he went and did Miss 45 as well, and he does quite taboo films. He's quite a character himself, though. I mean, he self-confesses he was high on coke half the time shooting Driller Killer. Have you ever heard his audio commentary that he did on Driller Killer?
No, I have not.
It's worth a listen if you can listen to that commentary. He is. I've heard people review it saying, did they pay him coke to do this the commentary or what? But it's very entertaining. He kind of forgets his own film at the beginning of it. Thinks they've ruined his film when the title screen comes up in red, and it's very funny to watch, actually.
We've already talked about it, but it's worth talking about again. That poster, that VHS sleeve, which was Mike's idea to grab people in, to lure them in, was designed to get sales, was designed to stand out on the shelves amongst all the other video nasties and horror films that back then relied on having the most eye-catching cover to get rented or bought. And it worked for Mike, but then it backfired when that was used as the poster boy, as it were, or even the whipping boy of the moral crusaders who were against the video nasties.
Which indirectly later in life helped VIPCO return with a vengeance because of using the whole video nasty, banned, unseen, unreleased logos and publicity that they drove to sell their Screen Time collection. So in the long run, it had an effect, but at the time, yeah, it was very damaging to them.
But one of the reasons why people were against Driller Killer and the poster was because, believe it or not, back then politicians claimed that people watching the film or even seeing the VHS sleeve would be inspired to go out and kill tramps with power tools in streets of England.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of video nasties, you definitely think of Driller Killer and that iconic case. I mean, that case is it's made that film partly what it is, but I mean, it's made such an impact that even the Arrow Steelbook tin has that artwork on it of the tramp getting his head drilled. So it's another example, like with Zombie Flesh Eaters, the images are forever left and forever used, really, and it's still kind of marketed as a really gore underground horror film, which again, it's a bit misrepresented, really, that film.
Yeah, like I said, I was disappointed when I first saw it. I have learned to appreciate it again in the decades since I've first seen it. I must admit, I'm not that big a fan as you sound, Jason. But maybe as from the perspective of a filmmaker, you appreciate it more than me, who's someone who has only ever dealt with disappointment with that film.
when I first watched it, I was a bit taken back because I must admit I was expecting more of a kind of 80s style slasher horror film and like the 70s style that the Italians had brought us, and it did shock me a bit at how different it was and how much more meaningful it was and how arty it was, and it was a build-up film as well. The film takes its time and builds up, but you follow the character and you kind of understand to a point why he kind of loses the plot and does it, and he gets pushed too far. To be honest, as I've gone through later in life and all what I've gone through in life and as an indie filmmaker and as a struggling artist and just what life crap's thrown at me, I can understand more than ever he's a breakdown in that film, and the film feels angry. It's like full of anger, taking shit out on society in the world. So yeah, it means quite a lot to me, that film, actually.
Well, I must admit I agree with you there. I do personally feel like as I get older, now 35 and a father, only just became a father, and I feel like I'm still learning to be an adult, as it were, and the more I see and the more I feel like I'm approaching middle age and finally coming to terms with the world and where things are, I do feel like the character, at times, and I also do feel a bit like Michael Douglas in Falling Down. I understand why you, Jason, would feel that way about how somebody who's had enough mentally unravels. I'm coming that way now. I think it's better to label it as being jaded, although obviously this being a horror film or an art house film, with it being film in general, Ferrara's intensified the feelings and the themes of the film, and it manifests itself in killing the homeless with a drill.
Without sounding like a nutter, I can understand his character's frustration in life, and I think he takes it to the extreme, but it is also very influential to me as a filmmaker. I did respect what he done, like, going out there and getting a film made and taking on the main role himself and overseeing so much of the production and being very hands-on with it and making what he wanted to make. As I say, he was just out to make the film he wanted to make and tell the story he wanted to tell, but it got labelled and misrepresented a horror film, I think, and just kind of got caught up in all that. But really, he was just trying to be quite a different standout arty filmmaker and kind of got painted with the same paintbrush as other exploitation films. I don't think it's such an exploitation film, but I think VIPCO exploited the film and cashed in on it for business sense and to get what they could out of it. So really, it's quite ironic that he was making a film about the exploitation of life and ended up getting exploited through the film he made by distributors. So it's just quite ironic that.
Do you think this film would be as fondly remembered by people if it wasn't classed as a video nasty?
I think a lot of these video nasties and old VIPCO titles probably would have been forgotten if it hadn't been for the advertising campaigns and the whole video nasty scandal. I mean, the video nasty scandal definitely gave life to films that otherwise would have probably died of death and had a very small cult following. But I think the video nasty era in the UK has helped these boutique labels reissue these and cash in on them and make these films notorious. So in the long run, it did them a favour. It didn't seem so much at the time, but definitely there's a lot of films on the video nasty list that aren't amazingly made and quite shoddy. And if they was made today, they would have been ripped apart. But there's a lot of nostalgic feel attached to these for a certain generation audience. I know sometimes new audiences discovering these films probably wonder what all the fuss was about. There's a lot more extreme, harder stuff out there now than Driller Killer and Zombie Flesh Eaters. But I myself remember these films thinking, oh yeah, at the time when I saw them, they were quite groundbreaking to me. I hadn't seen such on-screen gore. And in that moment when he does stick the drill in the tramp's head, that was really well done and was quite graphic, and I was like, wow, that's pretty insane. But as I say, to today's standards with stuff like Hostel and Saw, it's kind of nothing really.
Yeah, the video nasties, I mean, there is so many films associated with it that I do think only are best remembered because of being nasties. And if you actually take the time to watch the film or analyse it a bit deeper than just being a visceral horror movie, some of them are just, as you said, they're not well made, or they don't hold a candle to today's standards. I mean, some of these films are still banned in the UK. However, some of them are still banned because no one's resubmitted them. And a lot of these video nasties eventually a few years down the line, they had cuts and were re-released. Obviously, VIPCO did that in the early 90s. But as you said, for some reason, Mike Leigh passed up on reissuing Driller Killer.
Mike wasn't particularly a big fan of Driller Killer. Again, he had that pre-cert VHS that made him a lot of money, and but I think that film shook him up a bit, because I say that film was what landed him in quite a lot of deep water, really. That's probably one of the biggest films that landed him in deep water because of the case and his advertising campaign. I mean, Shogun Assassin caused him a lot of trouble as well, because he put a big page spread advert out and they sold a lot. But the cover on that was tame, and to be honest, but Driller Killer was really picked apart in the press as being a vile, banned, disgusting film, not good for kids and all that. And so I think he stayed a little bit away from that film after that fiasco.
Mike has mentioned to you, and in research for the book Video Nasty Mayhem, he's mentioned how, yes, the Driller Killer poster and sleeve got him in a lot of hot water, but when it came to running the advert, none of the magazines and newspapers that ran that advert declined his money to run that advert in the magazine or paper. So, these newspapers and magazines in the 80s were preaching about video nasties, yet at the same time, just weeks before, they were taking Mike Leigh's money to feature the Driller Killer advert in their very magazine.
Of course they was. It's all about money, isn't it, for them? Like putting out big headlines about video nasties to sell papers, and then at the same time love a bit of income from someone who's willing to pay a lot of money to get their video sales. So it's just greed of the world. Again, what Driller Killer deals with, ironically.
Just at least with Mike Leigh, he was honest. Obviously, I've seen an advanced version of Jason's Untold Story, VIPCO Untold Story, but in that, Mike does talk quite a bit and openly about how sometimes he was only dealing with certain films or did certain things for VIPCO because he was in it for the money. And I think Mike's candor and honest approach to that is probably why he's been so critical of these same newspapers and magazines that are always two-faced at the best of times, especially tabloids. He's very critical of them demonising VIPCO and other people for selling nasties, yet weeks beforehand they were taking his money to run their adverts. But that's all to come in an Untold Story. But you'll see that Mike's very honest about how, yeah, he did this, he did that, he wanted the money, he wanted to make a profit. But he does seem a bit annoyed that the newspapers took his money and then sort of bit the hand that fed him, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I'd be pretty pissed off if I'd spent money, got them to run an advertising campaign, then they use it against you a few months later down the line. Really, it is a bit of a joke, but that's the way of the world in business for you, isn't it? Really.
Well, it was the same back in the early 80s, and it's the same now. There's so many double standards, and Mike Leigh dealt with it back in the 80s, and I'm sure there's people dealing with it now. But with Driller Killer, Jason and I have agreed that this was one of those films that put VIPCO on the map. We've already covered Zombie Flesh Eaters because that was the first horror film Mike dealt with, and it made him a millionaire. But then he followed it up with several other releases, but in that timescale, in those several releases, was the likes of the Driller Killer, Shogun Assassin, and the Boogeyman. And these films, with the covers and the controversial content and being classed as video nasties, these, for Jason and me, the Fab Four, the golden era of VIPCO in the video nasty period.
Yeah. I must admit, when you say VIPCO to me, or even video nasties, as I've said earlier, I do straight away see Driller Killer, and as I said before, Bogeyman, Shogun Assassin, and Zombie Flesh Eaters. They're the ones that really stand out to me.
Over the years, a lot of people have released it. It's been released on VHS, DVD multiple times. I must admit, Jason, I first got it on DVD back in 2002, I think, from the Pound Shop, and it came in a double bill. It was the Driller Killer and Demon House, aka Night of the Demons 3.
Yes, I actually have that DVD myself. I have many versions of it. I picked up a horror box set that actually has that set in the box set. Ever since VIPCO got their hands on Driller Killer and sell it loose in the world as a nasty, it's just always been remembered as a strong horror film, a strong uncut horror gore fest, and it always will be remembered for that. So it's a shame in a way, because I do think the film is worth a lot more than what it got tainted with. But That can be said about a lot of films, to be honest with you.
I'd say probably the most latest release that I purchased of The Driller Killer. I imagine there's been more since then, but 2016, when Arrow Video released the steel book and the dual format versions of Driller Killer, which also had unseen footage in there as well, I believe, or it's an unseen version. I'd say Arrow Video have gave that film probably its best and most worthwhile release since VIPCO.
Yeah, it's just a lovely release. I've got the steelbook from Arrow of that, and it's a beautiful release. And I was very excited when they announced that, especially the steelbook with that artwork. That was a pre-order, day one purchase for me.
With The Driller Killer, you said there Mike never touched that film again since the pre-cert era, and that makes me think of a couple of other films that Mike gladly sold in that era, but never went back to. The so-called Andy Warhol video nasties, such as Frankenstein and Dracula. VIPCO sold quite a few copies of them. In the early 90s, when Mike relaunched VIPCO, he said he wanted to go back and release them films again. He never did that. Driller Killer, despite its financial rewards for Mike at the start, just never came back to VIPCO. Whereas other films from that era, Mike kept re-releasing them. He kept re-releasing Shogun Assassin. I think I have that on. I don't have a pre-cert VHS of Shogun Assassin, but I have two different VHS releases of that, and a DVD that Mike put out. So he tried to get his money's worth there. But,
Shogun Assassin was his biggest, most successful release. I mean, he said he did a white and wash option of Shogun Assassin, so it was like an E180 tape where you could watch the film, and if you didn't like it, you could record over it. He said he sold bucket loads. It also got raided and confiscated, but he got the stock back, so it caused him a bit of trouble. But that film, he loved it. He actually genuinely really liked that film. He thought it was just pure bliss. I don't think he knew much about the origins and the root of the film, but he enjoyed it, put it out. It did well for him, but I mean, it did really well for him in the DVD era as well, despite it being the craziest widescreen film I've ever seen in my life on the release that he put out, which is talked about a lot. The DVD sold bucket loads because obviously it was uncut, but then what helped him, and Barry Gold said this about the stockist, that they did a deal with HMV and re-released it again with a slightly different cover because of the Kill Bill films, because it was mentioned as the sleepy bedtime film in Kill Bill 2. HMV did a promotion where if you bought anything in store you could get Shogun Assassin for $2.99, and Barry said that they just sold bucket loads. They had such a good deal with HMV, they were churning thousands of those out. So Shogun Assassin alone just made Mike a very happy and wealthy man. Shogun Assassin's the only film he did where, as well as releasing it on video and then later DVD, he actually did a cinema release of it. He got that at the cinema, but he didn't enjoy the experience. He said he just liked to go to the cinema and have fun and chill out. He found that a hard part of the business, and that was the only time he kind of messed around with a cinema release. But it was for Shogun Assassin.
I actually, again, much like these VIPCO titles, I didn't see them for years, but with Shogun Assassin, before I finally saw that film on VHS, I remember seeing clips of it. It seemed to be there was clips in every episode of the old Channel 5 show Out There, if you remember that. Out There, which was for a while hosted by Emily Booth, but they always seem to have clips of Shogun Assassin, and probably a few other VIPCO titles over the years. But as Jason said there, Shogun Assassin made a lot of money for VIPCO, as did Driller Killer, but maybe the fierce witch hunt, as it were, that Mike suffered put him off re-releasing or trying to obtain the rights again to re-release Driller Killer. Whereas with Shogun Assassin, he was left to his own devices and made a lot of money from it.
I mean, he pushed Shogun Assassin a lot. It meant a lot to him because every single DVD that he put out has the advert for Shogun Assassin. Whenever I got a VIPCO DVD, he was guaranteed to be treated to those 4 special trailers: Mountain of the Cannibal Gods, Psychic Killer, Shogun Assassin, and Cannibal Holocaust. The same 4 trailers every time.
And the thing is, when Mike re-released King Frat, which is a frat comedy, when he re-released that on DVD, he released it under a different name. He tried to make it look like a different company that wasn't VIPCO. I think he called it 5 Star Entertainment. But if you look at the extras are the same 4 trailers that appear on every VIPCO DVD.
Yeah, It's like the default menu system.
Yeah, you're watching King Frat and you want to watch the extras, and you assume the extras will be associated with the comedy film that you've just watched. And instead, you get a trailer for some video nasties and Psychic Killer.
It is quite crafty because, back in the days, it's like the film plus extras, and most of the time, those extras were those 4 trailers that if you were collecting, you'd seen 100 times. I mean, I know those trailers off by heart for the amount of VIPCO discs I've got and flicked through and seen them.
Well, Jay Slater said that in Mike Lee's mind, having a menu on a DVD was classed as an extra in itself, and people should have been grateful for that. But I remember those days. I don't know about you, Jason, but I remember those days when I first started getting DVDs in 2002. People were still relatively excited by DVD, and a lot of DVDs would mark it on the back of the sleeve, interactive menu, as if it was a big deal, as if you should be paying a $5 extra for that alone.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like I was real in my peak of collecting VIPCO in 2004 and 5, and by 2005 I was actually making my own DVDs of films I was making, and I was doing some crazy discs with interactive moving menus and extras and trailers and galleries. And one of the actors in my film goes, like, that's incredible, that's amazing, I've done all this. He goes, so what's the excuse for labels like VIPCO turning out these piss poor discs? So it was then I did question myself, thinking, well, yeah, why are the VIPCO discs so piss poor when I was at home manufacturing my own, like, quite state of the art special edition DVDs? But as Mike says, it was a finance thing.
And Jay Slater has often said to both of us that he used to sort of plead with Mike to make efforts to treat these films better. There was, I can't remember the name of the film. It is mentioned in my book, so this is not an excuse to plug my book, but buy my book, Video Nasty Mayhem, to find out what film it is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but Jay Slater said there was a film that they were going to acquire the rights to, VIPCO. Jay was quite excited, and then when Mike Lee inquired about maybe digitally remastering the film because it was quite bad, and bear in mind, Jason will agree, Mike never really did any digitally remastering, despite saying otherwise on DVDs. Mike Lee inquired about digitally remastering it because it was not a good copy. And when he found out the cost would be £50,000, Mike Lee said, forget it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where Mike wasn't such a technical person, and he relied on others and didn't fully understand technology. So he honestly did believe that by the film being put on DVD, that is a digitally mastered version, which obviously it isn't, but he was using the old Beta SP tape masters, which were given for what you'd use back in the day for the VHS dubs and in the early days of DVD. But also, to be fair, back in the day, there wasn't many extras available for films like Cannibal Holocaust and stuff, because they weren't really a lot of behind-the-scenes material and stuff. And then that is extra money. And to film the new documentaries, which companies do now, such as Arrow, they get all the interviews and that would have come at a big cost, because you had to have paid for a documentary crew to put something together. And as you said, that was a cost that he wasn't willing to depart with, which at the time was a niche market and still is. They are niche films. But over time, a new audience has found them, and these new crazy editions that boutique labels are putting out are very, very appealing. But I think, VIPCO was a different era, really. I don't think they would have got the sales they get today.
Mike did on a couple of occasions attempt to go the extra mile for him, because City of the Living Dead, that came with an audio commentary. I think that's the only VIPCO release that had an audio commentary. And there was another film that they were trying to do a recording for a commentary, but Mike actually stopped the recording because the people involved, naming no names, were saying quite offensive stuff during the commentary. So Mike had in the past attempted to do commentaries, had spoke about digitally remastering films, but decided against it. And you've also, you in a way, have helped Mike Lee look into getting other films that he otherwise wouldn't have covered, such as before you and Mike were looking into getting Absurd as a VIPCO title.
Yeah, I had a meeting with him, and he was talking about his releases to me, and he was getting a bit stressed out. He said HMV was offering him a bad deal at this time for the money he was getting for what he was supplying. And I did mention about the covers to him, and I said, oh, why don't you reissue some of your releases with the original artwork? And, you know, like Cannibal Holocaust having original artwork and Ferox. And he goes, do you think that would make sales better? Because he said he owned all the artwork, he had everything because he'd bought the rights. And I said, yeah, you should. And he was definitely toying with it. And then I said about, you know, like getting more cool films on the label, and I did mention Absurd because at the time Absurd was really hard to get and hadn't had a DVD release, and he actually believed it would get through the censors, which, you know, we now know it definitely does, because 88 Films put it through and got it through Uncut, and he was going to go into looking for that, but again, this is all when it all started to fall apart, and he closed the doors. But it was near a possibility that he was going to go for Absurd and maybe even have better artwork. I was convincing him. Other people had spoke to him and tried to convince him before, but he generally seemed to be listening to me, and he did put artwork on The Claw, which was an indie film, because I was talking to him about doing my indie film. You know, he was toying with doing artwork on that Premiere label. If not, as I said before, he'll put it on the shit black case with the gold writing if he felt like it wasn't going to sell a lot because it cut his costs down. The Claw's a good example because it was a new indie film. It did have extras on it, like a making of and behind the scenes, because they was able to supply that. I know Island of Death had a like 50-minute interview with it, which I was shocked at when I put that disc on. It had an extra feature, and but I did ask about that, and Jay Slater said, yeah, it was like available with it. So, you know, that was kind of handed with the package when he released it, so he stuck it on there. City of the Living Dead was Jay's baby. Jay and Kevin Gates and Jay Slater actually did do the audio commentary and did an interview for a token fee, and did quite a nice disc, and it stands out amongst their releases because it was for VIPCO was a packed disc. I was pleasantly surprised. But yeah, but then they did try it again. They convinced him to do an audio commentary for Zombie Creeping Flesh, and that went a bit disastrously wrong because, as you said there, halfway through on a break on the commentary, there was a bit of a fight breaking out with comments and people's opinions, and the plug was pulled, and that was the end of extra features of VIPCO. That put him off, and that was that. No more ever again.
To be honest, I don't think Mike would have needed an excuse to stop doing extras, but I know, and I think Jason obviously knows the reason what was said. It's very offensive and controversial, so we won't repeat it here, but if anything's going to put you off doing extras for a DVD, it would be that. But then again, Mike probably was thinking already, you know, shall I cut my losses now while I'm ahead?
Yeah, more hassle than it's worth in his eyes, I think.
In terms of Driller Killer's place in VIPCO history, I think we're both in agreement. Hopefully any listeners will agree. Driller Killer is definitely one of the sort of cornerstones of the company.
Yes, absolutely.
The next episode of the podcast will be about the Boogeyman, whichever way you want to pronounce it. To me, this was the sort of, along with Zombie Flesh Eaters, the sleeve for this film always stood out in my mind, especially when in the 90s VIPCO ran that advert that usually aired on Sci-Fi Channel with Father Riley, blood pouring down his face, holding the crucifix. So that's going to be the next episode. Lommel's masterpiece, The Boogeyman. Anyone listening, have any more recommendations or any questions, let us know. We have got a Twitter account now, which is at Strong Uncut Pod. So check messages on there. Usually Jason and me will respond or what have you. Before we go, I think it's safe to say that I'll need to get my plug in again for my book, Video Nasty Mayhem, The Inside Story of VIPCO, out November the 18th, so very soon. And Jason is the director of Untold Story, which is about VIPCO, and he's got a very big surprise to come soon as well.
I do, yeah, and there's a VIPCO Untold Story page on Facebook, and there'll be some announcements, especially end of November, so keep an eye out on that, and you can use that to keep up with updates regarding the documentary, because there's more on the horizon for it.
Well, with that, I've been James Simpson.
And I've been Jason Impey, your wonderful indie filmmaker, and I'll catch you next time.